I never thought a few careless words could reshape the quiet rhythm of my life. Yet, there I was, sitting on the edge of the sofa, staring at my cup of tea, realizing that something had already shifted, though I hadn't noticed it at first. It was subtle, like a shadow passing over sunlight unnoticed until you turn around and the light is gone. That evening, the house was unusually silent. My husband, Nathaniel, had stayed late at the office again, and the children were wrapped up in their homework. I felt a small, inexplicable tension in my chest, a whisper that something was different. I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just fatigue. But as I stirred the tea absent-mindedly, my mind kept replaying a conversation from earlier that day, a comment made by my sister, Celeste, while visiting in the morning. "You always let things slide, Mara," she had said casually, sipping her coffee, eyes fixed somewhere distant. "Sometimes I wonder if you even realize when people take advantage of your kindness." The words seemed light, passing like a feather across the table, but for reasons I didn't understand, they lingered far too long. I had laughed it off, of course. Celeste always had a way of stating things bluntly, often in ways that were meant to provoke reflection but felt more like criticism. I smiled politely and changed the subject, but now, hours later, her words weighed heavily on me. I realized that in my marriage, in my friendships, in my life, I had been quietly retreating from confrontation, letting little irritations go unspoken, hiding my feelings to preserve the peace. The room felt colder than it was, and I hugged the blanket around my shoulders, trying to anchor myself in the present. Nathaniel's laughter from the television downstairs, he was probably watching some old sitcom rerun, reached me like a distant echo, and it made my heart ache with a quiet, unnameable longing. Was this what my life had become? Comfortable, yes, but also cautious, careful, restrained. I thought about how the comment had slipped into my mind. It wasn't meant to sting. It wasn't meant to create doubt. And yet, here it was, unraveling the careful tapestry I had woven around my emotions. The small things I had ignored, the quiet moments I had dismissed, they all seemed more vivid now. Every compromise I had made to avoid a fight, every silence I had accepted to keep the calm, now appeared as if they had silently taken away pieces of me. A soft sigh escaped my lips, and I found myself wishing I could rewind the morning and confront Celeste differently, or perhaps speak to Nathaniel about things I had tucked away behind polite smiles. But life rarely gave such clarity before the moment was gone. Regret, I realized, was a quiet thief, appearing long after the act that summoned it. I remembered the way Nathaniel had glanced at me during dinner earlier that week. His eyes, usually warm, had held a flicker of hesitation, a shadow of unspoken thoughts. I hadn't pressed him. I had laughed it off, assuming it was nothing, yet now I wondered if his hesitance was his own small way of carrying unspoken truths I had failed to ask for. Outside, the evening had settled into a soft drizzle, each drop hitting the windowpane with a gentle rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat in the darkness. I closed my eyes, letting the sound fill the space around me, hoping it might soothe the tension coiling in my chest. And yet, even as the rain pattered, the words lingered, echoing in my mind like a refrain I could not silence. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. I opened my eyes and realized the house felt heavier, as if the air itself carried the weight of unspoken words. My reflection in the window looked back at me with a mixture of confusion and resolve. I knew I could not continue as if nothing had shifted. Something in me had changed, quietly but irreversibly. And yet, I wasn't ready to act. The night stretched before me, full of possibilities and uncertainties, each shadow whispering secrets I had yet to confront. Somewhere in the distance, the soft hum of a car passing by made me flinch, reminding me that the world outside moved on, regardless of the small tremors my life had begun to feel. I sat there, sipping the now lukewarm tea, heart beating in an irregular rhythm, waiting for the first ripple of courage to move me forward. And in that stillness, I understood the gravity of one small comment, the way it could quietly, almost invisibly, start to change everything we hold familiar. A sudden creak upstairs startled me. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it made me realize I was no longer alone with my thoughts. Someone or something had shifted in the house too, and my pulse quickened, carrying a mix of apprehension and anticipation. Whatever had begun with one simple remark was far from over. The next morning arrived with a pale, hesitant light filtering through the curtains. I stayed in bed longer than usual, feeling the chill of the room on my skin and listening to the quiet hum of the city waking outside. Somehow, the world seemed both unchanged and profoundly different at the same time. Nathaniel had left early, as usual, his presence already absent, leaving a vacuum I couldn't ignore. I traced my fingers along the edge of the blanket, recalling Celeste's comment from yesterday. "You always let things slide, Mara." The words repeated themselves in my mind, gently persistent, like a stone skipping across water. I wondered if they were right. Perhaps I had allowed too many small silences, too many overlooked moments, to build walls where bridges could have been. Breakfast was a muted affair. The children were unusually quiet, absorbed in their routines, oblivious to the storm brewing quietly inside me. I forced a smile, trying to appear normal, but I knew Nathaniel would notice the subtle tension in my shoulders if he were there. And part of me wanted him to notice. Maybe I needed him to. By mid-morning, I found myself wandering into the study, where I often retreated when the house felt too heavy. The familiar scent of old paper and ink should have brought comfort, but instead, it felt like a mirror reflecting the questions I had been avoiding. Each book on the shelf, each photograph framed neatly on the wall, seemed to whisper, "When will you finally speak up?" I picked up a photograph of Nathaniel and me from our wedding day. The smiles we wore then were wide, fearless. How had life narrowed those smiles, constricting joy into caution? I remembered the days when a small argument would end with laughter, and now, even minor disagreements felt like chasms I didn't know how to cross. Celeste's words had been a seed planted in my mind, growing quietly overnight. I couldn't shake the feeling that every overlooked word, every unspoken thought, had accumulated into something larger than me. The house, the city, the very rhythm of my life felt like it had shifted subtly, carrying me along a path I hadn't intentionally chosen. By lunchtime, I had resolved to confront my unease, even if only to understand it better. I called Celeste, unsure if I wanted guidance, consolation, or simply the sound of a familiar voice. She answered on the second ring, cheerful and seemingly oblivious to the gravity that weighed on me. "Mara, I was just thinking about you. How's everything this morning?" Her voice was light, airy, but I felt a strange need to pour everything into it, to let her hear the ripple she had caused. Instead, I simply said, "I'm okay. Can we talk later?" She agreed, her tone unconcerned, yet somehow, I sensed she knew more than she let on. And in that brief conversation, I realized that the shift inside me wasn't about anger or resentment. It was about awareness. For the first time in a long while, I was noticing the currents beneath the surface, the unspoken truths that shaped our lives silently. The afternoon passed slowly, the quiet punctuated only by the distant sounds of the neighborhood. I busied myself with small tasks, though my mind was elsewhere, circling back to Nathaniel, to Celeste, to every moment I had ever ignored for the sake of calm. I realized that life wasn't cruel, it simply moved relentlessly, and if one wasn't careful, one could drift too far without noticing. When Nathaniel returned that evening, he seemed distracted. His brow furrowed slightly, his smile tighter than usual. We exchanged our usual pleasantries, but I sensed that he, too, carried silent thoughts, just as I did. The air between us was thick with words unspoken, a tension that neither of us had addressed yet. Over dinner, the children chatted about school, laughter punctuating the room intermittently. Nathaniel reached for my hand once, briefly, and I felt a flicker of warmth and acknowledgement, perhaps, that we were both navigating the same shifting tides. But the unease lingered, a quiet pulse beneath our ordinary life. Later, after tucking the children into bed, I sat alone again in the living room. The house felt suspended in a gentle hush, as if holding its breath alongside me. I knew the change was subtle, nearly invisible, but I also knew it was irreversible. The comment from Celeste had not been dramatic or harsh, yet its ripple had started, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I leaned back, staring at the soft glow of the lamp, and wondered what it would take to reclaim the space between us, between Nathaniel and me, between my life as it had been and the life I wanted to shape. The quiet tension seemed to thrum in the air, and I realized that the night held more than just darkness, it carried questions, waiting for answers I wasn't sure I was ready to speak. A faint sound upstairs made me start slightly, a soft shuffle of movement. I paused, listening intently. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it made my heart beat faster. Something, I sensed, was quietly changing, not just in me, but around me too. The next day arrived wrapped in grey clouds and a persistent drizzle, painting the streets outside with a reflective, almost melancholy sheen. I moved through the morning slowly, feeling the weight of yesterday's reflections still pressing against my chest. Nathaniel had left early again, murmuring something about a long meeting, and the children were absorbed in their usual routines. The house felt simultaneously empty and suffocating, each room echoing with the quiet hum of my own thoughts. I found myself back in the study, drawn to the photographs and mementos that once brought comfort but now seemed to illuminate the cracks I had ignored. The pictures of family gatherings, of shared laughter, felt oddly fragile, as if one small disturbance could make them crumble. Celeste's words echoed quietly in the background of my mind. I had tried to dismiss them, but the truth was that I couldn't. Not now. It wasn't anger that lingered, it was a quiet awareness, a prickling sense that something subtle had shifted in the very rhythm of my life. I realized that I had been living on autopilot, prioritizing calm over honesty, routine over connection. Every compromise I had accepted, every word I had swallowed, had quietly accumulated, forming invisible walls between Nathaniel and me, between me and the life I thought I had mastered. By mid-morning, I decided to step outside for a walk, hoping the drizzle would wash some of the heaviness from my mind. The streets glistened under the muted light, and the air smelled faintly of wet earth and distant rain. I moved slowly, letting the rhythmic patter of rain guide my thoughts, and tried to consider what it was I truly wanted. Not just in the abstract, but in the way I approached my family, my marriage, my own inner peace. I stopped near the small park at the corner of our street. The trees bent slightly under the weight of water, and the benches glistened with damp. I sat, noticing how the drizzle caught in my hair and clothing, and let the sensation ground me. There was clarity in solitude, I realized. The house, the routines, the quiet tension, they could no longer contain the questions that were demanding to be asked. By late morning, I returned home, soaked but oddly lighter. I brewed a fresh cup of tea, and as I sat in the living room, I noticed a folded note tucked beneath the vase of flowers on the table. It was in Nathaniel's handwriting, small and careful. I feel like something's changed between us. Can we talk tonight? My heart skipped, a mixture of relief and apprehension washing over me. He had noticed it too. The invisible shift wasn't just in me, it had reached him, too. Suddenly, the weight I had been carrying felt less solitary, and I realized that the acknowledgement itself carried a fragile promise. The day drifted slowly. I prepared lunch for the children, tried to focus on small tasks, but my mind kept returning to that note. The anticipation of tonight's conversation felt almost electric, an unspoken tension that thrummed beneath my skin. I wondered if we could bridge the quiet gap between us, or if the accumulation of small silences had already gone too far. As evening approached, Nathaniel returned home, slightly wearied but attentive. His eyes met mine with a hint of hesitation, a silent acknowledgement that we were both aware of the distance that had grown between us. After dinner, we sat together in the living room, the children tucked away in their rooms, and the rain still whispering against the windows. We began with small words, tentative and careful, testing the waters. And then, as if the dam had finally cracked, our conversation deepened. We spoke about the minor irritations, the little unspoken frustrations, the moments we had let slip into silence rather than address. Each revelation was gentle, and yet it carried the weight of years of restraint. I realized that this quiet acknowledgement, this mutual recognition of what had been overlooked, was itself transformative. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It was quiet, tender, and real. Nathaniel's hand brushed mine as we spoke, a simple gesture that felt like a lifeline, a reassurance that we could navigate the subtle shifts without fear. The rain slowed to a soft drizzle outside, the room dimly illuminated by the warm glow of the lamp. Our conversation lingered, meandering between reflections and small moments of shared understanding. For the first time in weeks, I felt a quiet release of the tension that had coiled inside me. And yet, as we settled into a tentative calm, a faint sound upstairs caught my attention. It was subtle, almost indistinguishable from the house settling, yet it made my pulse quicken. Nathaniel looked toward the sound too, and in that moment, I realized that the ripple started by one small comment was far from finished. Something was shifting still, quietly, unseen, and I was left wondering how far it would reach. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains in soft, hesitant streaks, casting a gentle glow across the living room. I stayed seated on the sofa longer than usual, savoring the quiet moment before the day truly began. Nathaniel had already left, and the children were still in bed, their slow breathing a comforting rhythm that somehow contrasted with the tension lingering in my chest. Even in the calm of morning, Celeste's comment replayed itself silently. "You always let things slide, Mara." It wasn't meant to wound, but its quiet persistence had begun reshaping the way I saw myself and my life. I realized I had been quietly accommodating, smoothing over frustrations and silences, and in doing so, I had slowly dulled the edges of my own voice. I walked through the house, noticing details I had long ignored, the faint scuff marks on the hallway floor, the way the curtains didn't quite hang evenly, the little pile of mail in the corner. It was as if my eyes had suddenly been attuned to the small imperfections, both in my surroundings and in myself. By late morning, I found myself in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought of Nathaniel, of the note he had left, and of the evening we had shared yesterday. There was a new openness now, a fragile honesty, but also the realization that one small ripple could touch every corner of life, and that sometimes, those ripples were still reaching, quietly, subtly, into places we had not noticed. The children came bounding into the kitchen, breaking the reverie with laughter and chatter. I smiled, feeling the warmth of their energy, and yet the tension that lingered from yesterday hadn't fully lifted. It hovered, an unspoken current beneath the surface, reminding me that change often came in small, careful steps rather than sudden leaps. Later in the afternoon, I took a walk to the corner cafe, seeking the solace of a warm drink and the soft murmur of other people's lives. I sat by the window, watching umbrellas bloom like colorful flowers against the drizzle, and felt an odd mix of nostalgia and anticipation. The comment, the note, the conversations, they had sparked something in me, a recognition that I had allowed comfort to outweigh confrontation, and that small choices could quietly define the life we lived. Returning home, I found Nathaniel in the study, seated at his desk, his expression thoughtful. He looked up as I entered, and for a moment, there was a shared understanding that passed between us without words. The previous night's conversation had begun a subtle shift, but today, it seemed like the momentum of that change had found its way into every small gesture, the way he placed a book back on the shelf, the way he paused before speaking, as if measuring the weight of his words. As evening descended, the house felt heavy with a quiet expectancy. We had made progress, yes, but progress was fragile, like walking on a path of mist. Nathaniel and I shared dinner without the usual background distractions, focusing on small, deliberate words. There was a comfort in this intimacy, yet also a tension, a recognition that the ripple started by one comment could continue to reveal truths we hadn't yet confronted. After the children were asleep, Nathaniel and I sat together on the sofa, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the room. I reached for his hand, and this time, he did not hesitate. Our fingers intertwined naturally, as if affirming a shared commitment to navigate the subtle changes in our lives. But even in this quiet connection, I sensed the undercurrent of unspoken questions, of adjustments that would need attention in the days to come. I felt a gentle pull toward self-awareness, a recognition that even the smallest comment could illuminate a part of life we had neglected. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't immediate, but it was transformative in its quiet persistence. And yet, as I sank into the sofa beside Nathaniel, the creaking floorboards above us drew my attention. It was subtle, a near imperceptible sound, but my heart picked up speed, aware that the unseen currents of life were still moving. The tension in the house had not fully dissipated, it had only changed its form. Something, I realized, was still quietly shifting, like a shadow that moved with the sun, silent and patient. For the first time in days, I felt the delicate balance between anticipation and apprehension. The night stretched before us, holding unspoken possibilities, small revelations, and subtle truths that had yet to fully surface. And as I sat there, hand in hand with Nathaniel, I understood that the quiet impact of one small comment could continue to ripple through our lives, shaping moments we might never have predicted. The following morning, the sun rose with a gentle warmth, spilling gold across the living room. I sat on the edge of the sofa, sipping tea slowly, letting the quiet seep into me. Nathaniel had left for work, and the children were still asleep, their breathing soft and steady. In this calm, I realized how much had shifted over the past days, the subtle tension, the quiet revelations, and the acknowledgement of truths long ignored. Celeste's words came to me again, not as criticism, but as a mirror reflecting parts of myself I had neglected. I had spent years smoothing over small disturbances, avoiding conflict, and letting silences stretch between the people I loved. And yet, through that single comment, I had begun to notice the gaps, the quiet moments that mattered most. By mid-morning, the children were up and laughing, their energy filling the house with life. I watched them for a long moment, realizing that every small moment I had overlooked was a chance to engage more deeply, not just with them, but with Nathaniel, with myself, with the rhythm of our shared life. There was a lesson here, gentle but firm. The smallest words, the quietest observations, had the power to illuminate truths that otherwise remained invisible. Nathaniel returned earlier than usual that day. His eyes met mine with a softness that carried reassurance. He had sensed the subtle shifts too, and in his presence, I felt a steadying comfort. Our conversation from previous nights had opened a channel of understanding, a mutual recognition that silence could either build walls or invite connection, depending on how we navigated it. We spoke in fragments at first, testing the waters again, revisiting moments we had avoided addressing. There was no tension now, only clarity, the kind that comes from being willing to acknowledge the quiet truths of life. I realized that our marriage, our family, and even my own sense of self were not fragile. They were flexible, capable of being reshaped by awareness and intention. As evening approached, the rain returned softly, pattering against the windows with a gentle persistence. I watched the droplets slide down the glass, thinking how much like life they were, small, steady, shaping the world quietly yet surely. Nathaniel joined me on the sofa, and we sat side by side, hands brushing, a wordless understanding flowing between us. There was comfort in the shared silence, in the knowledge that subtle shifts could be met with patience and love. I reflected on the journey of the past few days, the way one small comment had stirred a quiet revolution within me. It had begun as a fleeting observation, almost inconsequential, yet it had prompted reflection, dialogue, and ultimately, a reconnect with the people who mattered most. I realized that life's most profound changes often arrived not as dramatic upheavals but as gentle nudges, imperceptible at first, but undeniable once noticed. Later, after tucking the children into bed, I lingered in the doorway, watching their calm faces. A wave of gratitude washed over me. I was grateful for Celeste's honesty, for Nathaniel's patience, for the quiet wisdom that life offered through small, unexpected revelations. I understood now that the ripple of one comment had not been a threat to my peace but a subtle invitation to observe, to reflect, and to act with awareness. Nathaniel and I returned to the living room, and this time, the tension that had hovered for so long was entirely gone. We talked about the mundane, the small details of the day, laughter weaving between our words. I felt the comfort of connection, not born from perfection but from understanding and presence. The quiet night stretched before us, holding no hidden questions, only the gentle unfolding of life as it was meant to be experienced. I leaned back against the sofa, hands entwined with Nathaniel's, heart steady. The subtle lesson of the past days resonated clearly. Awareness transforms, acknowledgement heals, and the smallest moments, when noticed, can quietly change everything. Outside, the rain softened to a light drizzle, the world washed clean and new. I felt a peace I had not known I was missing, a quiet confidence that the ripples of life, small comments, subtle gestures, tender observations, were not to be feared but embraced. And in that moment, I realized that the quiet transformation I had experienced would continue to guide my days, shaping relationships, choices, and the gentle rhythm of life. One small comment had indeed changed everything, but it had also led me to see, feel, and understand in ways I had never before imagined. The house was calm, the night gentle, and I finally let myself breathe fully, knowing that some of life's quietest moments held the deepest truths.